Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
The royals took August off, and so did we.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot going on in August. And sometimes the podcast doesn't feel very fun, so we decided to take a little break, and we're back.
We did get up to some kind of accidentally royal-related things. Like, we went to visit Nebworth House, which is where they filmed the interior scenes at Balmoral for The Crown.
And that's the reason we went there, but when we went there, the house was closed for filming, and we saw a bunch of extras walking around in old-timey hairstyles, some period hairstyling, and the men were wearing kilts, which we can only assume means they were filming The Crown when we were there, which was very exciting.
I thought you were going to say we can only assume they weren't wearing any underwear, which is the tradition. But yes, we can also assume that they were filming The Crown, so that was very exciting for us. We couldn't go inside, as you said, but we could go around the grounds, which is also very much like Balmoral because they have that dinosaur park, which the Queen insisted on being built.
But yeah, we'll go back sometime and look inside the house, but we would definitely recommend it.
Yeah. Something else we might recommend, I don't know how we feel about it, is Camilla Parker Bowles' recipe, her own personal recipe for a Victoria sponge cake.
She published it this week in support of Poetry Together, an initiative that brings school children and residents of care homes together to read poems out loud. But Camilla decided she was going to shake things up with this recipe. She suggested that instead of using a traditional jam filling, you could use lemon curd or even Nutella.
I was shocked. Not only because this is so untraditional, but also as a nut allergy sufferer, I felt unseen.
She also suggested adding cocoa powder or vanilla essence to the sponge, which amounts to sacrilege in some corners.
I mean, she basically suggested make a Victoria sponge, but actually make a chocolate cake.
There was some uproar about it this week, as there always is. I always find those things so boring when people are like, oh, we put, ham in the bolognese or whatever. Like, and people go crazy. But people were very upset. They were saying Queen Victoria would be turning in her grave, to which I would say probably not. I feel like Queen Victoria would probably have loved Nutella had it existed at the time. As we know, she loved sweet things. She loved chocolate cakes that Mr. Francatelli, the pastry chef, would make for her.
A character who feels so familiar to me from watching that Jenna Coleman Victoria show, and then who also pops up. We have started reading Fergie's Mills and Boon novel, and he pops up in that.
We were reminded of him reading Her Heart for a Compass, something that we'll just say now we're not going to be talking about today because we haven't finished it yet, but we decided we would finish it, so it's actually not, unbearable. Like, it's not unreadable. We passed 100 pages and we said we'll keep going. So if you want to join us, we will be talking about that in our next episode, we promise, so you can come back and join us. But back to the Nutella. Prue Leith of the Great British Bake Off said, I think they sound delicious and a very good idea.
Which is, great praise coming from Prue Leith. I mean, it's not as good as getting Mary Berry to say it, because she's like the official royal cake mouthpiece.
But it doesn't get Tom's endorsement.
No,
sorry.
Not at all.
The biggest and the best thing, though, that happened while we were away was that in early August, like just after our episode came out, I think, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who was allegedly trafficked and sexually abused by him while she was underage. We know her from talking about her in her allegations against Prince Andrew, and now she has filed a civil suit against Andrew in court in New York, accusing him of rape in the first degree, sexual battery, and sexual abuse.
I thought it would be good to maybe run through some of the details of the case for any fellow non-lawyers who are listening, because we were so excited when this news came out, but also we have no legal knowledge and had no idea what it's actually meant. So I think the first thing to note is it's not a criminal case, it's a civil suit. So what that means is that Virginia wants the court to decide whether her allegations are true and whether the Duke should pay her damages. So it's not about whether he is convicted as a criminal for his actions. I don't find it easy to understand why there's a distinction between civil and criminal, but I'm sure it makes a lot of sense if you understand these things.
The main thing, though, is that what's at stake here is money.
Yeah.
And if Andrew loses this case, he would face a bill for damages of up to £14 million. And given how long these cases can go on, it's increasingly likely that Prince Charles would become King Charles and he wouldn't have mummy around to pay the bill.
Yeah, I'd say it's a lot harder getting money out of Charles than the Queen.
No way in hell is Charles going to hand over £14 million to Andrew.
Oh, and as for why it's happening now, New York State has this law that allows alleged survivors of historical abuse to seek redress many years after an incident. So Virginia had to file her claim before there's a deadline in August, and so if she wanted her case to be lodged, she had to meet that deadline. So that's why it's happening now.
Yeah, and why it's happening in New York. I saw some people asking why it wasn't happening in Florida, but that is why. Some of the other key points is that this case can only begin if a New York judge is sure the defendant, Prince Andrew, has been served with the legal papers. That means he has to personally receive a copy of the legal allegations before the court, as you've probably seen many times in films and television.
Such as Suits, when they say, "I'll see you in court," and hand them a big envelope full of stuff.
Bear this in mind for later. We're going to come back to this.
Yeah. The case could proceed 3 ways. It could be thrown out by the judge immediately as legally inadmissible. It could go to trial and be decided by a jury. Or the 2 sides could reach a settlement, which is like an agreement that they would reach out of court. And David Boies, who's Virginia's lawyer, has said that Virginia had tried to resolve her complaint without resorting to the courts, but Andrew failed to respond. So that maybe gives you some indication of, whether a settlement is likely.
Yeah. The next steps, though, are that once Andrew has been served, Virginia's team would then begin pressing the New York court to order the production of evidence that may be useful to this case. So most of this material would ultimately become public, although Andrew would have the legal right to dispute its admission or bring counter evidence.
And a key part of the evidence that they'd be gathering would be a deposition. So that's where the defendant gives their version of the event under oath. And it's often once that's happened that a settlement might be reached because, it becomes clear whose stories are stacking up and stuff. So Andrew would be deposed if he chooses to cooperate or participate in this case, but he can't be forced to go to the US to give this deposition because it's not a criminal case.
Yeah.
So we obviously want to see Virginia win this case, and we want Andrew to have a huge, massive fine for what he's done. But even if Virginia wins the case, it's not the end of the proceedings.
Yeah, her team would have to come here to the UK and ask a High Court judge in London to rule in a follow-on case that Andrew would have to pay. But if Andrew doesn't take part in the case in America, which feels very likely in my opinion, a London judge could reject the case as unenforceable, so that would protect Andrew from the damages. But it wouldn't affect the New York court's judgment against him.
Yeah. But the whole point of this, as we said, is to hit Andrew where it hurts, i.e. his pocket. So it would be really disappointing if he manages to wriggle his way out of paying if it's all resolved in Virginia's favour. But I do think it's quite good we weren't covering the proceedings of all this as it was coming, because we got dribs and drabs over basically the whole month that we were off, and it's quite good that we can gather them all together into one story here.
So as we know, August is the month when the Queen takes her month-long summer holiday in Balmoral, and she is often visited by various members of the family.
Presumably she needs as many people as possible to come and help chase the bats out of the building with massive nets, whatever it is.
But the first guests to arrive this year were Andrew and Fergie, which is terribly surprising, really.
Yeah, I think Andrew is often the first to arrive.
But unusually this year, Fergie was able to spend the whole of the 10-day trip in Balmoral. Normally she has to leave before Prince Philip would have arrived, but now he's gone. She's around for the whole thing.
Well, royal sources told The Express that Andrew was actually summoned by the Queen for crisis talks earlier than he had expected to go up to Balmoral. They said, he was summoned up to Balmoral, there's no doubt about it. The Duke is locked in talks, both with the Queen and his advisors, which includes his ex-wife, that's Fergie, who it's fair to say is his closest confidant. There's no surprise to anyone that Fergie has ended up being very publicly back on the scene mere weeks after the Duke of Edinburgh's death. Everyone knows the clock is ticking and all the further embarrassment is being caused, but after this latest turn, he is fighting to save the last crumb of his reputation.
That crumb is so tiny as to be unrecognisable.
I mean, this is Andrew insisting that there's a crumb there when there isn't one.
Apparently he's been on the phone to his lawyers every day. The Mail had a quote from a palace insider who said, "We are extremely unhappy at the legal strategy of stonewalling. The Duke's burying his head in the sand. The only person he's talking to is his lawyer, Gary Bloxham. We just hope Gary has some magic legal trick up his sleeve, as every hour of silence, not even repeating the Duke's declaration that he's innocent and denying any sexual impropriety, is shredding his reputation. He could at the same time say something to show sympathy for anyone who is a sexual victim." Weird term.
But I mean, like, that's exactly why he really should only be listening to his lawyers, because like a statement like that saying kind of sorry to anyone who is a sexual victim, or using some other kind of weird term, or even if they got the terminology right, you know, it still comes as so little, so late, and he would be torn apart, quite rightly, for making such a statement. But I guess people who work for the royals always seem to think that they have all the best ideas and all the solutions to all problems.
Royal aides, though, apparently aren't all that convinced by Andrew's account anyway. They think there are some inconsistencies there. According to the Times, they believe there are credibility problems with his version of events. And a royal household source said, "No one at the palace knows what to believe about what Prince Andrew is telling them. Some of it doesn't stack up. The basic problem is that he's a massive embarrassment, but you can't sack him." There are also questions over some of the legal advice he's been getting. That is so funny. The basic problem is that he's a massive embarrassment, but you can't sack him. So true.
Very true. But you might be asking who is paying for all this legal advice, whether you find it questionable or not. Well, he's currently being supported by the Queen through money that she gets from her private Duchy of Lancaster estate. And it is, in my opinion, such a bad look for the head of state to be paying for her son's defence against accusations of raping a minor.
Yeah! Jesus Christ! Wait, though, what's the Duchy of Lancaster?
The Duchy of Lancaster is the Queen's private estate of like a massive property portfolio, a lot of land in the north of England, but it also includes some like very pricey areas of London, amongst others. So it's income she gets from rents and stuff through that.
This is all just such an ugly look for the Queen.
It really doesn't fit her kind of granny of the nation look that she likes to kind of... Well, maybe not that she likes to try on, but that her defenders really like to push hard on.
Yeah, I think, when you look at this all together, it's very obvious that the Queen has a massive blind spot for Andrew. Like, maybe somebody would make the argument that paying the legal fees is something like even a really disappointed parent might do for their beloved child. But the Queen isn't trying to distance herself from this situation.
No way.
The other big story is in the Times, the Queen let it be known that she wants the Duke of York to remain as Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, despite little prospect of him returning to public duties. It is a significant intervention signalling her support for Prince Andrew. Which is just, I can't believe this. The terminology is very delicate, obviously, this letting it be known.
Yeah.
But we know what that fucking means. And this senior military source said the Queen has let it be known to the regiment that she wants the Duke of York to remain as Colonel. And the feeling is that nobody wants to do anything that could cause upset to the Colonel-in-Chief. It is a very difficult, unsatisfactory situation. His position is not tenable or viable. How can you have a colonel who can't perform the role? For the brief time he was in post, he was a good colonel, but the feeling across the regiment is that it's not appropriate to retain him. You can't have a colonel who can't do public duties. come the fuck on.
Yeah. Apparently, as well, the situation had been discussed amongst senior defence chiefs, and all agree, according to the source, that he should go. So, like, one of the royal family's big things is their respect for the armed forces. And the Queen is the colonel-in-chief of the armed forces. But I just think this shows that that kind of respect seems to be another big lie. Because, the Queen seemingly wants us to separate her as a person, i.e. like granny and mum, from her in her professional capacity, which is head of state, colonel-in-chief, head of the church, all that kind of thing. But here she demonstrates that, like pretty much everyone else in the world, you can't do that. You can't just separate those two things. But in normal life, if your personal feelings affect your professional decision-making, you step aside. You let somebody else make the decisions. You retire or quit in extreme circumstances. You don't just force everyone to protect your son who is being sued for sexual abuse.
Exactly. And I think it's kind of striking, actually, that so much of what we know about the Queen as a mother, or what we believe about the Queen as a mother, is that she's cold and uncaring. She doesn't have a great relationship, particularly with Charles. But that actually the thing that is probably going to taint her legacy in the last years of her life is her unwavering devotion to Prince fucking Andrew.
Yeah, and I really like the way that Christopher Anderson, who's an author of a lot of books about the royals, he put it that Andrew always shamelessly played Mummy like a fiddle, and she's always been willing to be played. And I think that's the really key thing here. Like, let's not just say, oh, Andrew's just really good at manipulating the Queen. Like, the Queen wants to be manipulated in this situation.
The Queen has way too much sympathy for Andrew.
Yeah.
And it's affecting her judgments as head of state. And the fact that that's not the fucking biggest headline in all this is maddening to me.
Yeah.
Whatever people, a lot of people have already made up their minds about Andrew, and they often will say, like, oh, but I just like the Queen.
Cop on.
Yeah. Wake up!
Jesus Christ. You can't say that anymore. But, supposedly Andrew was quite cheerful over his Balmoral stay, and possible reason for that is that his lawyers might have a few tactics up their sleeve with regards to this civil suit. So, a top US lawyer, Spencer Cuvin, suggested to the Mirror that Andrew's legal team may claim that he had diplomatic immunity in America as he held the role of Special Representative for International Trade and Investment for the UK in 2001, which is when Virginia alleges that he raped and sexually abused her.
God.
This sounds like maybe an argument that could be opening up a whole can of worms that the royals don't want to open. Like, if he is protected under the Diplomatic Relations Act because he was working for the UK government at the time, like, what UK government is going to want to step up to the plate for him and protect him over that? Like, Jesus Christ. You can only hope that this is going to spark, like, a mass outrage in the UK, one that will never go out.
One of their other tactics, though, the one that really stood out to Tom and I, was that according to The Sun, Andrew has been hiding in his royal mansion to avoid officials trying to serve him with a lawsuit. That security guards stopped multiple attempts by lawyers last week to hand the documents to Andrew at Royal Lodge, his home in Windsor.
And yes, this is the security guards that the Queen is paying for.
I can just picture it so clearly, him sort of hiding and like peeking out the window.
Yeah.
Are they coming again?
Don't let them give me the envelope.
But if Andrew refuses to accept the civil summons, he risks facing a judgment by default next month, and I can only imagine that his refusal to participate would go against him.
I sort of wondered that is his tactic, and this is pure speculation from a non-lawyer, but like, is his tactic to not participate, to get this judgment by default really quickly, and then either get Mummy to pay while she's still alive, or to try and get the UK courts to reject it as inadmissible, like we mentioned earlier?
I think I'd need a legal brain
to
tell me what the deal is.
If he's doing the maths and being like, hang on, if this is all happening in 5 years' time, I might not have the apron strings to rely on. I don't know. But we've been so excited to see this case taken to this next level. I honestly can't imagine how Virginia Roberts Giuffre has the strength to go through all this.
I know, I think about like some of the comments and messages and stuff we get kind of lashing out at Virginia and things like that. And I can't imagine what kind of stuff she has to deal with. So she's just a true hero.
Yeah. We really hope, obviously, that she gets... I mean, this money is just a fraction of the justice that she is owed. Like, you know, don't get us wrong, this money doesn't make anything all right. This isn't...
Or to have a judge say that her allegations are true.
Yeah, that's I guess, the more precious part in a way. But I am also kind of hopeful that having this very public and protracted show of, like, frankly disgraceful behaviour from obviously Andrew, but also the Queen, might further chip away slowly at the British people's love of the monarchy. And if it does, like, Virginia, you have my utmost thanks for the service that you're doing for Britain.
Yeah, I'm hoping that as this continues, that people will increasingly see the Queen's role in this as instrumental.
Yeah.
And that won't get sort of shuffled off out of the narrative, because she really is central to this in a lot of ways, in how she's funding his defence and protecting him in a variety of ways. But could all this mean that Andrew might get shuffled out of his home where he's hiding away?
There's been a lot of talk this summer about royal living situations, in particular the Cambridges. We spoke earlier in the summer about a report in the Sunday Times which seemed to us to have Prince Charles's fingerprints all over it, that Will and Kate would be dispatched to Scotland to save the Union. And then they sort of seemingly responded that actually they were looking at homes in Berkshire, not Scotland, so that they could be closer to the Middletons, Kate's family.
But now we're hearing that Will and Kate are actually considering a move to Windsor. And this is also something that's been sort of developing over the month. Last month, the Daily Mail had quite an interesting column by Dan Wootton, whose parents only left the Sun, looks like, that Prince William is eyeing up Royal Lodge as questions are being raised over whether Andrew should retain the property which is leased from the Crown Estate. I've talked about the Crown Estate a few times, but the sovereign grant is based on the profits of the Crown Estate. It's a property business that's owned by the monarch, but it's run independently. So it's not like the Queen's private property. It just belongs to her for as long as she's the monarch.
Which begs the question, is it appropriate for Andrew to live in such a extraordinarily lavish grace and favour property? It's a grade 2 listed mansion with 30 rooms, which he has a lease on it until 2078, and this is the killer, at a rate of £250 a week.
That's just sickening.
Prince Andrew pays less rent than I do.
Yeah.
Like, just, I fucking hate it so much. Like, it's easy to forget, but, like, it can be so cheap to be so rich. Like...
Wootton quoted a royal source who said, "The ongoing personal scandal involving Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein is a source of much heartache for Charles and William, who are trying to protect the future of the monarchy. There is now an active discussion at the most senior levels of the royal family about how Andrew can remain at Royal Lodge, given the circumstances. The Queen will not want to upset Andrew, and she loves having him close by as they regularly ride together. But he is no longer a working royal, and the princesses have both moved out." That's Beatrice and Eugenie. "Prince William is thought to have expressed an interest in taking over the lodge at some point in the future. And it's unlikely that Charles would stand in his way. It would make more practical sense too, given the size of the Cambridge family and the need for them to be close to London." What the fuck? Are they not close enough to London in their like apartment/mansion at Kensington Palace? Is that not the whole point of them having this apartment that they refurbished to great expense?
Our great expense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more bullshit reasoning. But apparently Fergie is also a problem. So despite the fact that she and Andrew are divorced, she still lives at Royal Lodge. And she's been doing press for Her Heart for a Compass, her new novel there. And apparently Charles is not happy about it.
Yeah, the source said, "The Queen is very affectionate towards the Duchess of York, but Prince Charles thinks the whole setup is absolutely outrageous. It adds to the embarrassment of the situation."
So he inherited a lot from his dad then, not just the Duke of Edinburgh title, but also hatred of Fergie.
I mean, it is a bit yikes having her doing these interviews with like photos of her in the house and like talking about like her home and kind of using it to promote the novel, given the novel does have a sort of royal storyline.
Yeah.
But Will would be only too pleased to take this property off their hands. And a week later, the Mail on Sunday followed up this Dan Mutton column with a story that Will and Kate are seriously considering a move to Windsor, in the most significant sign yet that the couple are preparing to take on a far more senior role at the heart of the royal family. What the fuck? This guy is going to be king in like 30 years. How much more senior does it get?
Yeah, I mean, they're constantly a mode of preparing to take on more senior roles. Like, where else is there to go?
They did also reportedly consider Fort Belvedere, which is another property in Windsor Great Park, but that one has been dismissed as an option for them to live. But this Mail on Sunday story seems to be suggesting the Cambridges would sell their country home, Admire Hall, in Norfolk, as it is basically no longer useful to them.
This is a property that's on the Sandringham estate, and it was a wedding gift to them from the Queen. And a source said Admire Hall made sense while William was a helicopter pilot in East Anglia, and it was useful for Christmases at Sandringham, but it doesn't really work anymore. It's a little too far away for weekends, but Windsor is a perfect compromise. They are eyeing up options in the area. Yeah,
and you might remember we talked about before that Andrew also received a property as a wedding gift from the Queen, Sunninghill Park, which he then subsequently sold in what was a very controversial deal in 2007, when a Kazakh oligarch paid £3 million more than the £12 million asking price and then subsequently demolished the property. So, I mean, I don't think Will and Kate would be quite as reckless, but I do think they'll have to be very careful because the public mood was very poor at that time towards Andrew.
The plan that the Mail on Sunday outlined is that the Cambridges will be based full-time at Windsor and commute into London when required. So, given that Royal Lodge is over 25 miles from Thomas's Battersea, which is George and Charlotte's school, which is at least a 90-minute drive, and probably more with the morning traffic, with everyone commuting, would they then change schools, bring their kids out of school and put them somewhere new?
I think they sort of answered that in a later piece, but I think that's an interesting point that the kids would have to change school, but also the Middletons, Kate's family's home in Bucklebury, is 40 miles away, so they would be a little bit closer to her family if they lived in Windsor than when they're living in Norfolk. But Vanity Fair had a story confirming this, that a move to Windsor is on the table and the idea has already been floated by Queen Elizabeth. So it's coming from the Queen, apparently. Royal source said William and Kate are very seriously considering a move to Windsor, and it has been discussed with the Queen. There are options at Windsor Castle, which is vast, and being close to the Queen, who is 95, makes sense to the family.
Do they just want someone there to like go on walks with her who isn't Andrew?
But there's quite a lot of people that live in and around Windsor. Like Anne's up there as well.
Oh yeah.
Eugenie and Jack. You know,
they can all pop around to check in on her. But Will and Kate are going to keep the massive Kensington Palace mansion that they call an apartment. According to this piece, William and Kate have been talking to their close friends about leaving Kensington Palace, where they feel very overlooked. It will remain their official London base, but they prefer being in the countryside, and the commute to London would be very easy.
That sort of throwaway line about they feel very overlooked. Can we get a follow-up on that?
Yeah, what the fuck does that mean? Like, they feel overlooked in their mansion in the heart of the capital city.
Overlooked by who? It's like by the public?
I mean,
by the royal family?
I feel like they'd be more overlooked moving to Windsor than in London, where, you know, a lot of their work is based in London. So it's much easier for them to pop out and do events and things with minimal hassle.
Yeah, especially because when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were moving from Kensington Palace to Frogmore Cottage in Windsor, the whole narrative was that they wanted a bit more peace and quiet and to get out of the capital. Whereas they seem to be pushing the complete opposite narrative here with Will and Kate, because yes, this Vanity Fair story confirms that they would have to change the kids' schools and that Kate being close to her parents is a big advantage. But the main story is so that Will and Kate can support the Queen and plan for the future of the monarchy.
So is it that they feel overlooked by the Queen? Is that what we should be taking from this?
Well, the royal historian Dr. Ed Owens elaborated on this theory a little bit in The Express, and he said, since the Megxit moment of almost 18 months ago, the Cambridges have been trying to redefine themselves and elevate their public images. The problem with being at Anmer Hall was that they were pretty out of the public eye. Obviously, they've always had their apartments at Kensington Palace, that's been their London base, but moving to the southeast and the Windsor area represents an opportunity to elevate their public image, to make themselves more visible.
He describes the move as a very deliberate and symbolic act. They're clearly trying to associate themselves with the Queen, present themselves as supportive individuals, and also associate themselves with this very historic site that's been important to the monarchy for a long time.
I mean, I'm so curious about what this means, because surely they would better support the Queen by staying in London, where they do most of their quote-unquote work, like you said. And if they really wanted to make themselves more visible, London is clearly the better place to do that, rather than sort of hiding out in Windsor.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I can really reconcile this is if it's to make themselves more visible to the Queen, and if they think it's more important for them to be able to meet up with her more often, rather than actually going and doing any real work.
I just don't understand what the purpose of that is, because the Queen, as we say, is 95.
Yeah.
And how much longer is she going to live? Because Charles has made it clear he wants to continue to base himself in Clarence House once he becomes king, rather than Buckingham Palace, and that he will be using Highgrove House, his country home, on the weekends rather than Windsor Castle like the Queen does. And, all of his operations are going to be between Buckingham Palace and St. James's Palace. So Charles is very much focused on London. And the Queen, isn't going to be around for that much longer. So Will and Kate are uprooting their lives and their children's lives to be closer to the Queen for probably, no more than 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And then go back to London to, support Charles when the time comes. I just don't really get it.
Yeah, I also do not really understand the logic here, but I'll be interested to see how many properties they accumulate in the process.
I'm very interested in what the response is going to be to if they end up buying a property or if they take over Andrew and Fergie's old place. I personally probably wouldn't want to be associated with where Andrew had lived.
I mean, unless they're trying to perform like the royal equivalent of an exorcism and they're trying to cleanse Andrew's residence by bringing
He's just going to get put into another property on the Windsor Great Park estate though, probably.
Yeah, probably with reduced rent. Like, he fucking needs it.
But, I know it's quite a grim topic, but since we are sort of talking about the Queen's death, Politico reported details of what will happen in the days after she dies, or Operation London Bridge, as we've spoken about before.
You might recognise that term. The Guardian first reported on it in 2017. They did this really, really long but really fascinating report about everything that happens when she dies, all these bizarre rituals that need to be observed. But this news story gives us more specific details about the arrangements, and a lot of them relate to social media blackouts.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. So the royal family's website will change to a black holding page with a short statement confirming the Queen's death. Then gov.uk, the government website, will display a black banner at the top. All government departmental social media pages will also change to a black banner, and the profile picture will change to the departmental crest. And basically any tweets or retweets can't be posted unless they've been cleared by the government's head of communications, because they want to have a very sensitive messaging around the Queen's death. So they've clearly had to consider social media a lot, which I think is really interesting.
You'd have to be a pretty confident social media manager to send retweets to the head of communications for the central government.
I presume it's retweets about the Queen's death.
Yeah, presumably. But I would like to see what that document looks like.
As we had heard previously in the Guardian's long read, the Prime Minister will be informed by a phone call from the Queen's private secretary, the message that London Bridge is down, and the public will be alerted by a newsflash on the Press Association newswire.
Actually, truly British people will just know.
There was also some silliness in this about lowering the flags to half-mast and whether they'll have someone on hand who knows how to lower the flags at Whitehall to half-mast within 10 minutes, or else risk a wave of public anger, which is
Come
so
on.
funny to me that they think people will care about that. I mean, maybe there'll be some maniac monarchist people who'll be counting the seconds.
Oh.
But I thought that was really funny. There are some quite grim details about the plans for transporting the Queen's body to London, depending on where she dies. You've got Operation Unicorn, Operation Overstudy, whether she'll have to go on the train or fly or whatever. But overall, it's a 10-day plan, and that includes King Charles having to do a tour of the UK.
You say having to do a tour as if he hasn't been gagging to do this for decades.
Well, he'll have to accept condolences officially in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And then the Queen's coffin, when it arrives in London, will be taken on a procession from Buckingham Palace to Palace of Westminster, where it will lie on a raised box known as a catafalque, which will be open to the public for 23 hours a day for 3 days. And they will issue tickets with a time slot to special VIPs, so they get priority access to look at the Queen's body.
Again, I want to see this wristband. What does it look like?
Who are the VIPs? I mean, I'm sure they're just random members of the aristocracy that we've never heard of before. But
Definitely the Chumleys.
could be some celebs.
The Chumleys would be there.
The Chumleys will be there, but what, famous people?
David Beckham.
Yeah.
He's been petitioning. Every year he sends a letter.
No, he won't get a wristband. He'll have to stand in line like everybody else. And people will be taking pictures oh my God, David Beckham is standing in line with me to look at the Queen's corpse.
On the 10th day, the state funeral will be held, and it'll be heralded as a day of national mourning, but it will not be an official bank holiday, which I think is pretty stingy. If it falls on a weekday, it will be left to the discretion of employers to give their staff the day off, and there will be no substitute day off if it falls on a weekend.
That's interesting, I think.
Yeah. The documents also reveal government anxieties about overcrowding in London and the possibility that it could become full for the first time ever, as potentially hundreds of thousands of people try to make their way to London with accommodation, roads, public transport, food, policing and healthcare. All our basic services would be stretched to a breaking point.
I thought that was really scary.
I think it's a very scary possibility. I also think I'd be mortified for them if it doesn't happen. Now that they've said it.
I mean, I really hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, but it also oh guys, we think everyone's going to come to London for this, and then if no one's really that bothered.
Yeah, they're imagining that, every hotel and B&B in the city is going to be full, and that, you won't be able to move outside on the streets because there'll just be people, wailing on the road day and night for days. So, if there is for some reason anyone listening to this who is planning to come to London when the Queen dies, please don't do it.
Yeah, watch it on TV. There won't be possibly as extensive coverage as there was of Prince Philip's death, because they're never going to do that again. But I'm sure there'll still be a lot.
And we'll let you know if we see David Beckham in the queue. The royals are furious, though, that these documents have been leaked. A palace source told the Mirror it is deeply disturbing that such private information, which is not only deeply personal to the Queen, but also has widespread security implications, has been revealed. And a Cabinet Office source said that the government is considering a formal investigation to track down the mole.
Oh my God, such a spy movie term for such a stupid situation. What is the harm in us knowing these things?
That's what I thought too, especially if it could have very serious consequences for people that live in London.
Yeah.
When all these freaks descend to look at the Queen's corpse. But, obviously there is, they're concerned about a possible terrorist threat and that kind of stuff. So, Anyway, she's not dead yet, and she is planning to resume her full workload, apparently. 6 whole engagements have been announced for the Queen this autumn.
Oh, God. Okay.
And they promise that this is not her full programme. There will be more, but the top thing on the agenda will be her appearance at the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow on the 1st of November.
I couldn't believe that. She's taking the piss.
She's taking the piss. This woman who lobbied the Scottish government earlier this very year to become the only person in Scotland with an exemption from the green energy law is going to Scotland to talk to people about the climate crisis.
It's too much.
As the only fucking person in Scotland who is exempt from a climate law to bloody sail in and wants to talk to people about the environment.
I hope someone
Fuck
throws
off.
an egg at her.
Me too.
That is total bullshit.
And I can't believe I saw the president of the climate conference was really excited that the Queen is going.
Oh, get a grip. Embarrassing. Anyway, we will be back before the Queen goes to Scotland to talk about whatever unfolds in the meantime. And finally, we will be bringing you our culture catch-up with The Young Royals on Netflix and Fergie's book, Her Heart for a Compass. And possibly something else if we can think of it. In the running is Budgie's a little helicopter.
Yeah, if you guys have any recommendations or suggestions of things you'd like to hear about, please let us know.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.
I simply, it was almost impossible for me to sweat.